Hey everyone, we're in Porto, Portugal for a 9-round tournament. This is the biggest tournament in Portugal this year with over 300 players playing in the Maya Chess Open. Yesterday I had round 1, my first tournament chess game in 4 years. And so in case you missed the live Twitch footage, here is the personalized recap of the game. In the first round of this tournament, keep in mind, my rating has been inactive for 4 years. So I'm quite underrated because I have been playing chess these 4 years. And so my rating was 1871 FIDE, and I was up against a higher seed, 2167 Candidates Master from Germany. Here is the recap of the game. I hope you enjoy. So I had the white pieces against Candidates Master from Germany. And let me tell you, before the round, my prep was 0 to nothing because I was setting up my stream for the past like 3-4 hours. And so I came into this game with 0 prep, and I feel like my opponent was very prepared. Either he knew his theory or he prepared exactly against what I played, because we played the first 12 moves in about seconds. I play e4, he goes e5. I go knight f3, knight c6. So attacking, defending. Knight, bishop c4, bishop c5, c3, knight f6. This is all book moves. We're just going into an Italian, playing theory, and this was all played in the matter of seconds. The proof of this is, after king f8, queen takes b4, and queen e7, we trade. In this position, we have +4 and +5 minutes on our clock. So I have +4 minutes from the starting allotted amount of time, and my opponent has +5 minutes because of the increment, so the added 30 seconds of time onto our clock after every move, which is crazy. And so in this position, this is where my theory pretty much ends. After king e7, we get into an endgame, and for the next 59 moves, for the next 59 moves, we play out this endgame to the bone. In this position, I have an isolated pawn. Okay, on d4, this pawn is considered isolated because it has no adjacent pawns on adjacent files, right? So I cannot defend this pawn properly with other pawns, which means it is greaterly apt to being attacked. Now, this pawn isn't entirely bad. Why? It is not on an open file. So black have a pawn here, which means it's harder for black to put pressure on my pawn via an open file and really attack it, pressure it, which would increase their chances of winning a pawn, right? Now, my advantage here is that I have a 3-on-2 on the king side. If I manage to scale my pawns up the board and create a passed pawn from that, the higher my passed pawn gets up the board, the more dangerous it can become, and that's the key way for the white pieces to win objectively from this position. So I played castling. It took about 3 minutes to come up with this. I was going between knight c3 or castling, but I didn't really want to commit with knight c3, so I go castling. I don't know, I'm threatening rook e1 with, you know, like a little pin here. It's not winning by any means, but it's activating a rook on an open file. Knight c3 is coming in soon, and so my opponent comes to the chair and plays immediately king d8. Why king d8? Because the king goes off of this weak open file, and so I can't pin the knight anymore, and also liberates the file for this rook to come in. After 6 minutes, I come up with knight c3. So I was debating whether I go knight d2 to develop my knight or knight c3. Why knight c3? It's because here I want to unisolate this pawn and instead isolate this pawn. So I reckoned that if you trade here, the white pieces are better off now because I have a better pawn structure here, and this pawn is the weak pawn now. It's the isolated pawn that can't be defended by another pawn on an adjacent file, though it is harder also to attack because it's at the other end of the board and it's not so close to the center where there's a lot of action typically. So that's what I wanted to do. And so knight c3 I thought was a good shot, and my opponent directly just refused with knight f6. But knight f6 leaves me with a good position because now I just developed on c3 with tempo because my opponent had to regress their pieces back to f6. And so this becomes now interesting. Okay, so I go h3. I'm thinking that this bishop, once developed, will go to f5 and be a laser through my position. So I'm going to try with not only my majority of pawns on the king side, but with the advancement of those pawns to go h3, g4, and take up the f5 square and go against the grain of this bishop on c8. My opponent goes d6, and so here it takes up e5, so I go knight g5, threatening knight f7 to win a rook, right? And so black has to deal with this with rook f8 or rook e8. I had thoroughly calculated rook f8 and was sure that they were going to go rook e8 to go on this open file, but my opponent went rook f8 here. And so here I take a ton of time for this move because I had to calculate the sanctity of it. Okay, so I played this move f4. So there's knight h5 directly. Okay, knight h5 is a really good shot. It attacks this pawn twice, and I cannot defend it with another pawn on g3 because of knight takes g3. So I thought, okay, how can I defend this? If knight e2, this knight becomes very passive. It's not a good knight. I'm using a piece, a good piece, to defend a less good piece, and these are all constricted. It's passive. We don't like this. So instead, I found knight takes h7. You see, the knight, when it goes to h5, undefends this h7 pawn. And so if knight h5, now knight takes h7, and although my knight looks completely trapped, it is actually not. It can always go back to the g5 square, and I like my position. So let's calculate. I calculated that on rook takes f4 here, I have this beautiful move, like legit beautiful, g4. And here it's winning. On g4, attacking this knight and rook, you cannot move your knight to f6 or g3 because you lose your rook. So you have to get rid of this rook first with check on f1, right? So I have to respond here. Okay, so I take with rook takes f1, and this is attacking this knight, and now the knight is pinned. No, it's not pinned, it's trapped, sorry. If you go to g3 and you think you're okay, you're attacking my rook, so I go rook f3, and the knight is just trapped. Can't go to h5, can't go to f5 because of this magical pawn. Again, this little pawn structure really does well here. And this knight, the silent knight on c3 being the savior, taking up these two squares beautifully. And you cannot defend the knight, it is simply too far from your position. So on rook f1, the other option is to go knight f6, but I calculated that after knight takes, g takes, and rook takes, I have two passed pawns here, and the white pieces are completely winning. So taking the pawn with the rook is not possible. You can also try knight takes f4, but then I had just take your rook. So this was okay. Knight h5 was not possible, but now comes the second variation, and I had to calculate this too. h6 attacking my knight. It's complicated. If I go back to f3, this pawn is really undefended on knight h5, and I stopped calculating there. But I only calculated this, and magically I saw this. Reckon I calculated all of this before I played f4 a few moves ago, so I was really prepared here. So knight e4. On knight e4, okay, you can take, but after knight takes, it looks like white has a lot of space, and I can go g4 and f5 pretty easily. What I calculated, the crux of my calculation, was knight h5. Knight h5 attacks f4 twice, and again, I do not have g4 here, because now knight takes f4. The other time, the rook was already on f4, and then that won, but now knight takes f4, and this knight is perfectly fine, and black are up a pawn. So how do I go about this? And here, in my mind, calculating 3 moves in, after knight h5, attacking this, I saw f5, which is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful, only saving move in this position. f5 has for idea to go g4. It's the plan that we've always had, right? We align these 3 pawns and back up these 2 pawns while still always gaining space. So we're threatening g4. And you cannot take this pawn sacrifice 2 different ways. Let's look at it. If you take with the bishop, your bishop is lured onto an undesired square. This is called a decoy in chess, and let's for this fork on g4. Your pieces are forked, and if you try to get rid of one of them with bishop takes e4, your rook drops on f8, right? So it's not only a fork, it's also a pin on this bishop. So you cannot take on f5, really you can't. And if you take with the rook, now I have the tactic that we've already saw, we're familiar with it so far now, and now it's g4. So we're forking these 2 pieces, very similar to that line with the rook on g4 if you remember. And so rook takes would be forced with check on my king, I take back with the rook, and this knight is trapped. It's a bit different than last time, so here black still has a pawn here on h5, on h6, but if h5, I calculated that on g5 here, you cannot take my pawn on h3, And so I would have a passed pawn on g5 very winning. I would soon recuperate this pawn. If you take on h3, I have rook f8 winning the rook on a8. So this would all be winning. So after all those calculations, knowing that I finally could play knight ge4, or I could play f4 at the time, my opponent just goes with b6. Okay, b6 is a mistake. So we did good. We calculated everything as we should have. But here I had such a tough time deciding how to capitalize on the advantage here. I knew that this was a bad move. Why? Because it felt like it. Intuitively, I felt like this gave the white pieces a lot of initiative. So how do I initiate here? And so I played g4, but this wasn't the best move. Here the initiating move, the one that gives me a small advantage out of all of them, is knight takes f6. Okay, this is powerful because it engages the black pieces into literally playing a move, so it forces a move out of them. And now I have g4 with f5 things in the future, and overall I have a really nice majority, and this would be mission accomplished. I didn't like it for a certain reason, I don't know why. There's also g takes f6, but here I have f5, which is really strong, pressing against this f6 pawn, and I'm going to go with g4 here with a very nice pawn structure playing against the grain of this bishop. But on b6, look how clueless I was. On b6, I took 30 minutes to play g4. Half of my time was spent on my next move here. I went from 1 hour to 30 minutes, and we are on move 19. So I have 30 minutes for the next 21 moves. After 21 moves, I get bonus time. I get added 30 minutes onto my clock for the rest of the game. I had real time pressure in this game. So g4, it's an interesting move, and it's the ambitious move in this position. I had to calculate a lot to make sure that I don't lose pawns under pressure, because I know that I am currently overextending my pawns. So I'm using the time, the tempo that I have in this position to really get those pawns in before there's a prevention such as h5. And so that's why I didn't really like to go knight takes f6, because I didn't like h5 things, preventing g4 things. So I go g4. I go g4, and on h5, which I calculated for a long time, I had like f5. And if you took here, I would just take here first, rook or pawn takes, and then pawn takes. And I also came up with this very long line on g takes f6, h takes, and then rook g8, which forces out of my position rook f4 to defend. And I even saw this line, bishop takes f5, and here black can get 3 pawns for my piece, which can be an option for black. Here they have 3 pawns, though I calculated that after rook takes f6, I get a pawn back, and rook d2 check to get a 3rd pawn back for the black pieces loses to king e3. And here I'm threatening the rook, and I'm threatening rook f8, winning a rook. It's sort of like a double attack, and black are losing. So I was fine with this, though here I do acknowledge that my rook is extremely passive, and even though black doesn't go for tactics here, doubling rooks on this weak g5 square, these are hanging pawns. My pawn is backward on g4, which means that this g5 square is very strong for the white pieces. But I was still willing to go into this line. Anyways, I go g4, and again, like, that wasn't played, but that's the crux of chess. You have to calculate everything, and out of all of your calculations, if something mediocre happens, at least you didn't lose because you calculated the most possible. So knight takes e4 was played, knight takes, and then bishop a6. Now the black pieces are gaining activity, and this is the exact border of this game in which my advantage has been pretty good, and now black starts to have an advantage, and we see it already by the tempo they're gaining here. They take my knight, forces a reply. Bishop a6 attacks my rook, forces a reply. I go rook f2. Rook f2 is the only move. I think if rook f3, I just lose a pawn here with bishop b7, pinning my pieces. And if rook e3, well, then I just lose a pawn on f4. If I go rook e1, then my opponent can go like king d7, and I really didn't like this outstanding pin, so I went with rook f2, which is very simple and very good. King d7 is played, and it's another activation move. Not only the king is going up into the game, but the black pieces are activating their final big piece into this game with rook e8 coming into this open e-file. And so I played this in 5 minutes with f5. I embedded that on rook e8, my knight is attacked. I just had rook f4, to defend this entire position. So I can close the file on the e4 square, and ultimately, like, I can just like go rook e1, or even like king f2, king g3, but this loses completely. Completely loses, okay? Black have g5. g5. Thank God this wasn't played, because I saw this at the last second, but I almost played rook f4. Black has g5, winning a piece. It's a beautiful tactic. If I take en passant, forced, there's just my rook that drops. So it's really nice. And here, I can't defend this knight. My rook must move, and now rook takes e4. And I'm down a piece, and that would be an immediate resign. Now is the time that psychology has an effect on your brain, because you're looking at a second, you're improvising. I'm improvising at this point in the game, because I know I can't play the move I had prepared in this position. So I go knight g3. And so this opens up the e-file. And now black are slightly better for the first time in the game. Knight g3, and immediately my opponent goes rook e3. My opponent has an hour and 2 minutes after 23 moves, and I have 22 minutes after 23 moves. After rook e3, luckily, look, my opponent just took an 8-minute turn. I calculate on my opponent's time because I know that this is going to be played. So I'm not going to play myself and use these 8 minutes on my time. You calculate on your opponent's time, their best possible move, and you look at the line so that on rook e8, I only take 1 minute to play knight h5. Counter-attacking here and not defending with king g2. I didn't like king g2 because of bishop b7 with check, and it was very, very passive, I judged. So I go knight h5, counter-attacking for this weakness on g7, which is why I went knight g3. So on knight h5, attacking g7, rook takes h3 is what I had seen. And here I think my opponent missed this, but if I take on g7, I lose, okay? There's bishop b7, threatening mate on h1, and it forces rook h2. If I go like anything to give my king some air, so like let's say this king would go to f2, well then this loses to a skewer, right? So it's not only a mate threat, it's also a skewer threat. So after bishop b2, I go rook h2 here. And then rook g3, and I lose a pawn, and I'll lose another pawn. So king f2, and then this is a fork, and my position collapses here. So it was really crucial that I was not greedy, and I play king g2 first. Very, very nice move. If the rook starts attacking other pawns, I have king g3, and the rook is trapped here. So you can't do this. You either have rook e3 or rook d3. And again, strategically thinking, if I have 21 minutes, I'm calculating both on my opponent's time while they take a 2 or 1 minute turn, but still, I use this time for me. Okay, rook d3, for me, I would give this pawn in a second. So like I take this, and literally if you take here, I'm happy. I'm down a pawn, don't get me wrong. White is fully down a pawn, but because of the counter-attacking chances with king g3, with this plan that I had here, I was fairly confident that this was okay. Okay, it was okay. I'm not winning, but this is a position that can be dangerous, especially since after rook d3, I have a protected passed pawn. And if we think back to what I explained on move 12, this was the dream. This was the goal here, to get a pass pawn, and it's a protected pass pawn since it's defended by my bishop, by my other pawn. So it's what we set out to do. We have a protected pass pawn in this position, and it's super nice. And so here my opponent comes up with the best move and the only winning move, bishop c4. Super nice move. Hats off to my opponent. That's a beautiful move. Bishop c4 aims to, how should I say this? Aims to activate the bishop, but really the bishop will be Mr. Worldwide. In the sense that, okay, I didn't want to go like rook e1 here because I would just lose a pawn. Rook e1, bishop takes, and on rook a1, I saw bishop d5 check. Okay, so these are details, but look, I would be down 2 pawns here, and this is fairly losing. This pawn will drop soon. So I can't let this go. I have to play b3 first, check, and then king h2. King h2 is forced. Again, same thing, you guys. There's rook h3 if I go on g1, right? So king h2, and then rook takes d4, and now I take this third rank that was previously controlled by the rook with king g3. So here, rook f7, and now I miss the only move that really equalizes here, and it's knight e6. It's actually a tactical shot. So knight e6, you cannot take and win a pawn here, because I have the tactic rook e1 check, and now I'm winning a rook. So knight e6 attacks this rook, rook d3, and then king h4, and I would go here. And it's kind of interesting because you can still not take. And I have a fully fledged plan. So knight e6 would have been nice, but I didn't see it. I played f6, but it's a mistake. Why? Because this pawn is pretty weak. It cannot be defended by another pawn, and ultimately this pawn is not a protected pass pawn anymore. It's still a pass pawn. But I'll be fair to my credit, right? And this is what I had calculated. It is a weak pawn, but it is very hard to attack or pressure. My knight and pawn work beautifully to create a wall against this king, to not let that king attack it. And additionally, this rook cannot attack the pawn on f6 easily because my knight controls this e6 square. So how does black attack this? Check was made, and now king h4. And this is what I liked. I really like this plan with king h5 and attacking this weak pawn. If I win this pawn, I pretty much win the game because my pawns are now two connected pass pawns, very, very strong in chess, okay, especially in the endgame. And so king h4 threatens king h5. My opponent only has a few moves here and found the best move, a really nice resource. Again, my opponent played delightfully, bishop e4. And here there's a little trap. You can't play king h5 in 2 seconds because there's checkmate on h3 because of this bishop taking up g6. And so now I have to figure out a plan because bishop e4 does one of many things. You're playing your bishop to e4 to take up the g6 square, but you're also preparing d5. And now this passed pawn is driven into action. It's really, really nice. So I have to play accurately, but I have 10 minutes left on my clock here, and I have 10 moves to go until the added 30 minutes comes onto the clock automatically. So I play this, which is inaccurate, but my plan is to go rook h2 to take up the h3 square and go here. It's a very long plan, but I didn't have anything better in the amount of time that I had. My opponent plays d5, and I go rook h2 to threaten king h5. Bishop g6 is played. And so now I've succeeded. I can play rook e2 and go on this open file to aim for e7 in case they try to reactivate their rook in the future. Also, the f6 push was found out to be good by me. I liked it because this rook is super passive. You want to make your opponent's pieces passive in chess. It's a miss. It says b4, but the second I play this, the engine just says black is way better. So rook e2 is not a miss in my opinion. Rook d4 is played, and then I go king g3. And so here, okay, I have 6 minutes left, like extreme time pressure, and I go king g3 very quickly in 1 minute and a half, and I miss bishop d3. Though I'm not losing here, okay? So thank God. This is my second mistake of the game. The first mistake was f5 and embedding rook f4, if you remember correctly. This is my second mistake of the game. Here, this is a skewer. I have to make sure that I do not lose material here. What's also weak is this rook on d4. So how do I save this here? There is only one move that saves this. Look, I calculated this for so long, rook e7. It would have been super nice. So on rook takes, which is forced, I have takes, threatening e8 queen, so you cannot take my rook here. And this would force something like bishop g6. If you do bishop g6 to take up the e8 square, now I have rook f6. And it's super nice, right? Because the bishop is out of squares. And so you have to take, and now I win a piece, but then I lose a piece again to king f7. Again, I calculated this on my life. I calculated this yesterday. King f7, I have takes on h6 first, king takes, and I had calculated rook c6. And here, the black pieces are gonna have to give a pawn here. And so it's pretty much a draw. That's what I had assessed. Though, on bishop g6, which would be a draw, black have better, they have king takes. And so this was the other variation I had seen. Rook d1, pinning this bishop and threatening knight f5 regardless. If king f6, let's say, going out of the fork with knight f5, I still have knight f5. Knight f5 with attacks this rook and pins this bishop, and I would win a piece theoretically here. The only hiccup which I missed, 2 hiccups actually, well no, one hiccup that I saw, which was c5 and made me ultimately not play this line. After c5, you defend your rook, and I don't have any more tactics here. After takes, you can take, and now your rook is defended from any little tricks, and this pawn endgame is completely winning for the black pieces because they'll have 2 pawns simultaneously going down the h and d files. And so rook e7, although a nice tactical shot, does not work. And so finally I had to go with a rook d2 or rook e1. Which one did I play? I played rook d2. Okay. Also, wait, I still have one more thing. In this variation, you guys, king takes, rook here, there's the crazy move rook takes g4, which I completely missed in my calculation. And if this would have been played, I would have lost. Thankfully, I saw c5 and was convinced that black was completely winning anyway, so this is good. But rook takes g4, forking my king and knight, and if you take, bishop e2, forking my king and rook, and king moves, and this is all forced, you take my rook and you're up 3 pawns, it's completely winning. You're up 2 pawns, but it's still completely winning. So, that was not played, and after this, I go rook d2. But this is small advantage for black after c5 was found. Very, very nice move. And now you have taken off the pin. If bishop takes, I was fine with this. Like, bishop takes rook, rook takes rook, and I'm threatening this. If you take, I take, and okay, I'm down a pawn. But I feel like this is playable for sure. I'm still in the game. But after c5, you're defending your rook, threatening mine, and your bishop is free. Your bishop is free to go anywhere it wants, on vacation, you know? So I have to move this rook, and I go rook f3. Look, I have to defend the pawn. So I wanted to go somewhere where I pressure the bishop and still defend the pawn on f6. The best move was rook f2. But again, I have a minute and 50 seconds left to make the next 4 moves. So I go rook f3 in a hurry after 30 seconds of thinking, and I miss bishop e4. The best move of this position. My opponent played really well in this section of the game. Bishop e4 wins. It's a double attack that attacks both of my rooks here. I have to be careful, I have to defend this. If I move a rook, let's say rook f4, I lose a rook, right? And if I move a rook to defend my rook, well then just rook takes, and here, oh no, even this pawn falls. Wow, this pawn falls and black are up 2 pawns and it's over. So I have to take here. And now this gives black options. You see, black have sort of like a buffet. They can take this rook or they can take this rook here. And both ways are sound. If you take here, you attack my rook, and I have to move my rook. And if you take here, I still have to move my rook, and this pawn is really well defended. Though I liked this variation a little bit more because I have rook f4, defending my pawn here, and we're good. Although the engine comes up with rook a4. Sending this pawn to the shops, actually giving this pawn and threatening this one in reverse. If a5 here, then I can take the bishop. So it's really nice, it's kind of a double attack. My opponent took here, the best move, and is winning. And here you're attacking my rook, I have to move my rook. Now, if I go to f1, this loses even more because of moves like bishop c2 that take up the promotion square and this pawn just hikes down the board. So I have to go rook f2 to take control of the dark square on d2. Because that's the weak square this pawn has to march through to be able to promote on d1. So rook f2, kind of forced. My plan is to go fetch this pawn. So here I can't go king h4, because I had calculated that just king d6 and black arrives here first. I didn't like this. So it was really good that I went with knight h5 first to defend this, and then on king d6 I would have king f4. So this was the plan to defend here. Now, you saw the line here. This is actually winning for the black pieces. It's completely winning if they follow through with this plan. King d6, yeah, it doesn't really matter, but king e6 is a bit better. The idea here is that now you're opening up your rook for rook c7 and rook c2 to promote your pawn, to help promote your pawn, and to really make this weak d2 square a strong d2 square. And the idea is literally, okay, let's say I go king f4, rook c7, and then king e3. Rook c2 wins for black because on f7 threatening f8 with queens, you have rook takes f2 taking up the promotion square. I missed this and my opponent missed this, so thank God. And rook f2 taking up the promotion square, and now after king takes, well then just king takes, and this is completely winning, and I don't get there in time. So my opponent instead goes for king d6, and after king f4, bishop g6. Rook c7, still winning with this plan. Bishop g6 aims to win a pawn, I presume? So then I go king e3. So I'm saying, look, you can win my pawn. The pawn on f6 will fall with the accompanying king on e6, but I will win back a pawn here on e3. So that's exactly what happened. He took, and this is bad. You cannot give up a bishop here that's helping a passed pawn so firmly on d3. And this is a stroke of impatience by my opponent. And so after bishop takes h5, I get extra time. I get extra time when? Oh, le coup de grâce at king f4. I get up from my chair. I'm done. It's my 40th move. I get 30 minutes on my clock. Bonus. So bishop g6, and now I have more time. King e3, and we get into this endgame in which d2 push, rook takes, and rook takes. And here, it is a rook endgame. I am down a pawn. And rook endgames are very complicated, and they can be... This is as complicated as they get, I believe, unless you have two rooks in an endgame that can be more complicated. But here, okay, I don't want to sound boasting, but believe me when I say, when I looked back on this position and when we'll see this together, I played this endgame pretty flawlessly, which was really crazy for me, okay? So only move here is rook g2, only move. The rest loses. King e4, only move here once again, rook g7. The rest loses. This is why they're great moves. So why are these such good moves? Rook g2 restrains this rook on this 6th rank. Why? If you try to go fetch my weak pawn on h5, which would be the winning pawn to win here, I have rook g6 check right on time. King e5, and I take and defend my pawn, which means that black plays a king move. Not because they want to and they take space, they also do that, but because this rook now is free to attack my pawn with rook f5. And so that explains my second move, because on rook f5 now, I can go rook takes, or I can go rook check and force the king back. Actually, that was my plan. Rook check, force the king back first to f6 or e6 forced, f6 or d6 forced, and then rook takes a7. And this king is backed up, you take here, and this is defendable for white, definitely defendable. Rook g7, and now a5 was played to defend the pawn, and I go rook e7 check, rook e6. Again, this rook is kept passive. The rook is kept passive. Is such a positive thing for my position. So rook d6, and then I go rook h7. Again, honing in onto that weakness. This is their weakness, and this is my weakness. Fun fact, rook g7 loses to king f6, discovered check, winning the rook. So rook h7 only move, well not only move, but the only good move that I found, king f5 and then king d4. So my proposition is that I'm giving this pawn, but in exchange I'm winning this one, and that's exactly what happened. And so here I calculated this so many times. I mean, on their time, on my time, relatively the same thing. We go into a pattern here of repetitions a little bit, and then rook c2. This is the only way that black progresses. At this point in the game, you guys, this is drawn. I know that it is drawn because this is their extra pawn. A rook pawn, so a pawn on the side of the board in a rook endgame is always, and in pawn endgames as well, is always less good than a pawn in the middle of the board, okay? And given the fact that I come up with a really good idea to block this pawn, okay? So here I go rook b7, counterplay so that we trade pawns. I didn't like a4 because rook c3. And so not rook b2 because I can go rook king c4 and defend, but rook c3 barring my king from defending here and essentially attacking this. It's still drawn, but I have to find b4. It's the only non-losing move, and this looks ugly to me. So I'm glad I found rook b7 counterattack, and we trade pawns once again. And so now I give the pawn here. Now is masterclass king e4. Super nice. I have an option. I can either try to force to win this pawn and counterplay with this pawn here, which I found no use after a lot of king moves and a lot of trades. Black gets there first if we trade rooks and it goes to a pawn endgame. So I play king e4. The idea is that I get in front of this king to block the pawn from the front. And I get there first. Why? Because black can't shield my king because they would get off of this pawn on h6. So they have to do this detour king g5. And now I go rook b8. I could have also gone king f3, very, very drawn. But these moves are pretty much interchangeable. So king f3 here. And now king h4, they're trying to hold on to the space that they have, bringing their pawn, inching their pawn closer and closer to the promotion square. And now I come up with rook c8, undefending my pawn and giving rook a3. And this is where many would start to panic. In fact, I had a moment of panic here because I'm giving a pin here and I'm down to 2 minutes again, 2 minutes for the rest of the game. Luckily, I've been playing Blitz for the last 4 years doing content creation, so we're good. So rook a3, pinning my pawn to my king and threatening a4 here. These are musts. I think there's 3 or 4 moves that draw, but these are musts. I must find the next moves here. Rook a3. So here I find rook c4 check first, which pretty much forces king h3. If you go here, I think I just have like checks galore, and I can just, so like check, let's say, and if you go back, I have check again, and we would force a repetition or try to, and then this I would just get my king out of the way. So on takes, I would just take the pawn, and this pawn is not making progress. It's a draw here. So okay, I go check, king h3, and this is the idea. Here I am giving a pawn with check on b3, so that if you take with check, I go back here, and these pawns are forked. And whichever pawn I win, I reckoned this was a draw correctly, okay? So this would be a draw here, and if king, let's say, defends this one, well then I take here, and I reckon this is a draw as well. Because I would be in front of this king, and I would always force this king to be on h4 or h3, backing up against its own pawn, and so there would not be any progress there. So rook c5, really good move. I'm proud of that one. h4 was played. They did not take this pawn with check. I go rook c3 now. And here, you could really think, one could really think that a4 works, because you're pinning the pawn again to the ring, rook and king, and you're pressuring b3 twice. It looks losing for white. White has two draws, king f4 and king f2. I saw king f2 personally. On king f2, check, discovered check, a king check at the end of the game. King g4, and I would have rook c4 check. And now I win the pawn. Like, I got my two pieces off the third rank. The king goes back, and I win a pawn. And this is a draw for sure, for sure. So a3, a4 is not possible. Rook a2 is played to prevent my king to discover check on f2. I had king f4 here with king g4 when thinking about it. So check this and king g4. I missed this, actually. It's drawn on the spot. Wow. I did miss that. Wow, I just realized. Anyways, I come up with rook c1, which is really nice. I'm threatening mate. And you don't have many moves. You have, okay, you have rook g2 to do like check. But on check, I would just go back. And here there's no progress for black. And there's no checks either. And so king h2 is pretty much forced, and now I have king g4. The same idea pretty much as we just saw that I missed. King g4 attacks this pawn. On h3, I win the pawn with rook c3. Win by force. And this would be a draw. I calculated king here, rook takes, and then king here, and then I would win this rook. So not possible. But on rook c3, attacking this, I mean, it's really, really hard to defend this. Check, and I have king h4, and I rely on winning that pawn. Okay, so king g4, a4 was played finally, and now that's the coup de grace, because if we get rid of these pawns, there's no weakness on b3 anymore, and it's really just against this pawn. And this is what was played, king f3 here, and I'm threatening a repetition check with rook c2 and rook c1, which would be a threefold, and so rook a2 was played to defend the c2 square. And now I come up with king g4, back to g4. They give me the g4 square, I go back to g4. Why? Because on h3, I have rook c3 attacking h3. This was played, okay. This was played. And so here you have to do check again, otherwise I win this pawn, right? So this king f3, and now I'm threatening another repetition. Let's say just like rook b4, I have check, king here, check, king here, and this is forced. This is a forced draw. Crazy, right? This is going to be a very long YouTube video. I apologize. But it's a very complex game, so I wanted to share every ounce of my calculation. Rook a1. So check was played, king f3, and then rook a1. I was threatening a repetition with check and check, so they cover one of the ranks. And then I just go back to g4. And now the black pieces try their final trick. King g2, which I had seen in advance, thank God. On king g2, I cannot take this pawn, okay? You cannot do that after 70 moves. This is move 72. I would lose to rook a4 check, winning my rook. So I had to play rook g3 check first. If you go to h2, I just take with check. And if you go to f2, which was played, I take this pawn, and it's a draw. First round, a draw. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm just going to end it. No outro. Love you all. Thank you so much for the support. The rounds are at 4 p.m. Portugal time every day. If you want to catch these live on Twitch, we have live footage shown to you. Thank you so much for supporting. Thank you so much for loving, and see you soon for a recap every day.